We're just getting everything set up here. Just so you know, we are recording this meeting.
Good morning.
Good morning. Okay, let me move some of this stuff out of the way. Perfect. So good morning. I'm Edwin Duran. I'm a senior housing zoning inspector with the city of Seattle. I've been an inspector with the city for about 6 years now, and then a few more years in different municipalities. We have Elizabeth here.
Good morning. My name's Elizabeth Krasminski, and I'm a housing and zoning inspector with the city of Seattle. I've been here about 5 years, but I've got many more years experience in other jurisdictions. So welcome. Happy Saturday morning.
Yes, so good morning. We're here to answer any code compliance related questions. Feel free to ask. We'll try to keep it, one person at a time, or feel free to put something in the chat box, and Liz will read it, or I'll read it, and we'll give you an answer. So let's get started. Do you have any questions for us? Anything we can answer?
What?
Hello, good morning, Sharon. Can you hear me?
Oh, yes. Mute. Unmute.
We can hear you. Oh, now you're muted. Hello, Douglas. You're muted as well if you'd like to ask a question.
Sir,
Hi. No questions right now, but I'm excited to see your presentation.
Thank you. Q&A only, so no real presentation planned.
Okay. Only Q&A. I wasn't aware. Okay.
Yeah, sorry about that.
I'll think of something. Thanks.
Most people do. Chris McKay, did you have a question? Or Sharon Levine?
No, I don't. I thought it was a presentation. What is today's, what is the format for today?
Yes, I'm sorry about that. So today's Q&A, you could ask us anything related to code compliance, the ordinances we enforce throughout the city of Seattle. And there should be a slide up on the screen that gives you kind of an idea, junk storage in properties, people parking, where they can park in their yards, tree cutting complaints, weeds and vegetation, any rental housing type of questions, things like that.
Okay.
Good morning, Chris.
Morning, Chris.
this is Sharon. Can you hear me? Am I muted or not?
We can hear
Sharon.
you, Sharon.
Oh, okay. So I thought there was a presentation, so I sat down with a bowl of soup just now. But I have questions. So I filed a complaint against a homeowner in a row house who has built an additional structure on top of the roof. The structure is still built to maximum height, and I want to know what's allowed to be put on a roof deck. This person apparently has a hot tub structure built like an 8-foot by 6-foot by 2-foot structure on top of the roof, which houses a big screen TV, has a bar, is essentially a whole living area on the 4th floor outdoors. And I've already filed a complaint, and you guys are supposed to be investigating it, but I haven't gotten an answer yet as to what's legal to be put on a roof deck. What can you build, if anything? It already has the housing for the stairs.
Yes, great question. So basically, in Seattle, there are height limits. Most likely, if it's a newer construction, they're built up to that height limit, and there's additional allowances that can be built up there. You mentioned the stairs, things like elevator enclosement, all the mechanical equipment stuff can be up there. There's also things like guardrails that are allowed. But definitely what you mentioned, a whole structure, probably that hot tub up there, those things would require a permit. So you did the perfect thing. You submitted a complaint. It actually doesn't come to a housing and zoning inspector, which is what I am and Liz is. That would actually go to a building inspector, which is in a different division. It's a little bit different. But they would go out and ensure that they obtain proper permits if it's needed, or that they take it down if it's not allowed. Some of the things that they would consider would be, is that structure built to the height limit for the zone? If it is, then
Yeah, it was originally, the whole structure is built to the height limit.
so
So
then
these are add-ons.
yeah, they would not be allowed legally to put additional structures on top, to increase that height limit. They would have to be in those, the guardrails, planning for flower pots, things like that. So we would most likely make them take it down. Again, that would be a building inspector that would do that.
Well, because he has a big screen TV in this enclosure, apparently it's your department that deals with that. It's an electrical permit that would be needed. But I don't understand why when the inspector went up there, he didn't tell him to take everything down right away. Why it has to go, and they told him he can apply for permits. Why is he even allowed to apply for permits if they know right up front that it's illegal? And now he has until like March something, the end of March, in order to apply for the permit. I mean, in the meantime, this particular structure is blocking my view. He put up something up there that like blocked out half of my view. I'm just wondering why he gets all that time and why he even gets to apply for a permit.
Right. So we have to give people due process. They have to try to get an application started, and we allow them to try. However, that doesn't mean that they're getting off clear, right? So if they do not comply with our ordinances, there's definitely fees that are happening on the back end. So if we end up going to court, they're going to be charged pretty heavy amount of fees. Of course, we want them to come into compliance, and so, I'm not too familiar with the property. It could be that they didn't build up to the high limit. I just don't know, right? So the building inspector most likely went out there, said, this definitely needs a permit. And then, they try to figure that out. If through permitting, they say, nope, you're already built to the high limit, we wouldn't allow that, then that's something that's discovered later on in the process. But it'll definitely get addressed, and we'll definitely make sure that it's either permitted if allowed, or it comes down if it's not. And it sounds like it won't be allowed.
Thank you. I hope not. Thank you.
Thank you. Great question. And, and sorry about that situation there.
I am too.
If you want to give us the address, we can also look it up and follow up. Make sure somebody is looking at it. Again, more of a building site, so a little bit different than what we're doing.
Right. I don't think I want to give the address out on the public forum, but I am checking on it. I have called and I have complaint numbers and whatnot, but an inspector hasn't been assigned yet. But again, it's going to two different departments, and I don't quite understand that.
Well,
yeah. So
Sharon,
if somebody's sorry, go ahead.
So Sharon, there's probably two different divisions within the department that are, two different departments within the division that are going to address this. One is a land use matter because of the height limitations of buildings. The other is the electrical department, which is the inspection. They would both address it. Now, the reason why perhaps the electrical inspector didn't say, hey, take it down, get it out of here, like Edwin said, it's part of due process. We have to give people the opportunity, if it is allowed, to make application and maintain whatever they've invested in this. Now, if it is found to be contrary to what the code allows, they will again be given due process, and they have to be given a reasonable amount of time, because the standard is the reasonable person. So we have to give them the opportunities to either come into compliance, or we have to give them a reasonable amount of time to remove the structures that are not legitimate, not legal. So it's never fast, it's never easy, and it's often messy. I sent you a message in the chat if you wanted us to look into it further.
Thank you. I'm not too, let me see if I can find it, because I'm not.
Okay, hold on just a minute. I'm sending it right now.
Okay, thank you.
Great
interested
question.
to hear other people's issues, and I may come back with more. I did think you had a presentation. So, okay, great. How
I
do
apologize.
I send it to you? I don't even know how to do it.
I'll tell you what, Sharon, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to
type a message. Just type a. I don't want the message to show up for everybody to see.
do this, Sharon. I'll go ahead and I'll put my email address in the chat. You copy and paste that into your email and you send the information to me and I'll be happy to get back to you. Okay?
Oh, aren't you nice? Thank you so much.
You're welcome, ma'am.
Thank you, Sharon. That was a great question.
Okay, I'll listen to everybody else's.
So we have a few more people here. We'll just go back through our spiel here. A couple of introductions. I'm Edwin Duran. I'm the Senior Housing Zoning Inspector. Been with Seattle for about 6 years now, with a couple of other municipalities for a few more years than that. Today we have just a general Q&A open session. Ask us anything you'd like to know about code compliance in the city of Seattle. I have here Liz, Elizabeth Krasminski, and she can introduce herself. Liz?
Hi, my name's Elizabeth Krasminski, and I am also a housing and zoning inspector. I'm also the auditor for the restoration program, and I'm here to answer any questions that you might have about REO, which is a rental registration and inspection ordinance. But I also have many years' experience in code enforcement outside of the city of Seattle. I've been here at Seattle for about 5 years now, and have a couple of decades elsewhere. So let us know how we can help you.
Yes, and just so everybody's aware, this is being recorded. And so let's take our next question.
Hi, question if you guys don't mind. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, you're cutting off a little bit.
Oh, would you rather me type it or do you want me to just speak the question?
You could speak. I think this is okay.
Okay. So I am trying to put an accessory dwelling unit on my property. It is a manufactured home, so it's HUD compliance related. I'm wondering, what is the city of Seattle's guidelines in terms of putting a HUD manufactured home on one of their standard residential single family neighborhoods?
Sure. So, ADUs and DADUs are allowed in the city of Seattle, and it all depends on a multitude of factors. So, it's a little bit difficult for me to give you exact specifications on what needs to happen without knowing all the information. And usually in the code compliance realm, we're dealing with them when somebody does it and they do not obtain a permit. So we know that it's allowed. You'll just have to go through the permitting process. They'll look at the address, they'll look at the site, but it would typically be allowed if you get a permit.
Yeah, I guess my specific question is, is there a difference between HUD code compliance versus, the standard local city building code compliances? I mean, of course, let's say we get a permit, but I'm just wondering, does the city of Seattle look at the HUD compliance differently?
Yeah, that would be that's kind of more of a specific question for the permitting process, right? So,
Okay.
yeah, so I apologize for that. Liz, do you have any additional information?
So housing and urban development is actually a federal guideline. And while probably have some correlation, we would not be necessarily looking at the fact that it's HUD compliant and whether or not it would be with what the city of Seattle regulations are. That might be something that, like Edwin has mentioned, you might want to take that up as a question to the permits department. I also sent you in the chat that there is a tip sheet 116B. It's establishing a detached accessory dwelling unit. It's kind of a guideline for how you might go about doing that.
Yes, and they do have coaching available, so you'd actually sit down with a planner and you could ask these great questions, and they're more in tune with the fine details of what's allowed and not.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Sorry about that. Yes. Okay, Douglas, you have a question?
That was my question. I'm Douglas.
Oh, you're Douglas. So then Chris, sorry about that.
Yeah. Let me see if I can get my camera going. Can you see me?
Oh, yes.
Okay, good. So I wanted to listen as well. I thought there was going to be a presentation. I have
Sorry.
a little, well, no, it's okay. I have a little bit of an amateur interest, taking some classes in construction management, but for the last 3 or 4 years, my next door neighbor has just kept building things that seem a little bit more off and off. And one day last summer, I looked up and there was a huge, I could just see the top of it, but a huge potted plant that she had on the ground that had been moved to the roof. And this thing is like 10, maybe 11 feet. I mean, if that thing falls off that roof, it'll kill somebody. So also she's got like, it's like a hotel over there, 3 or 4 different, rentals. Then she built some kind of weird untreated wood with plastic corrugated top, like a gazebo out of 2x4s, and then put with a fire, some kind of fire. What do you call it? Not pie. There's a name for it.
Fire pit?
Anyway, what's it called?
Fire pit?
Yeah, but yeah. So it's just, there's more stuff back. There's just so many things wrong.
They're all on the roof? Pardon me, I'm sorry. Are they all on the roof?
No, the fire
Oh.
pit's on the ground.
Okay.
And the fire department has come and they haven't gone back there, but they'll come and they'll talk to her and she'll describe it. She'll say, oh, they'll say it's legal. The fire pit was real. That's when I filed a complaint, and it's in process. So, mostly I wanted to come and learn and listen as much as I could. Just because I'm interested. So I don't know if there's no specific question there because I keep seeing so many crazy things.
Sure. So you touched on a lot of things that would kind of apply to us. We'd obviously want to go and look at the sites, but if there's a lot of buildings in the back of the property, then in Seattle we have, lot coverage rules. So they would only be allowed to cover 40% of that backyard. So if they continue to build more and more structures, that's definitely something we could look at. Depending on the size of the structure, it may require a permit. We allow structures to be under 120 square feet without a permit, under 1,000 square feet in area, under 12 feet without a permit. So they're definitely allowed to put up kind of sheds, or you mentioned that gazebo, as long as it's smaller than that size. If it's larger than that, then they could still probably put it in the backyard, but they would need a permit for that. So again, it all just depends on what's happening with that property. We would want to go see it, so we highly recommend, if it is an issue, submit a complaint, which you said you have, and an inspector will go out. When it comes to the fire pit, that's a little bit more difficult because we don't have anything specifically talking about kind of these portable fire pits that you could buy at the store. I think you did the right thing by calling the fire department in that case. If they were to build something onto the ground, then that's something that we would want to look at, something that's more permanent.
I see. So are you allowed to build something out of like just 2x4s, just untreated firewood?
Yeah, so unfortunately, we can't specify the material that people must use. All we say is if it's smaller than a certain size, then we allow it. And then once you get larger than that size, then, we'd start looking at the permitting conditions, which might require a lot more things to happen to that structure than would normally be allowed.
I see.
Mm-hmm.
And then what about a big potted plant on your roof like that? What are the laws around that?
Yeah, a little bit difficult. I think we would definitely want to see it. I don't think there's anything specific about that. But if it poses a safety hazard, we can definitely speak to the owners about that. They would be okay to just do it if that's their property. If there's rental there, if there's children, people walking by there, we definitely want to try to make it a little bit safer for the pedestrians.
There's 3 or 4 different households living in this building, and over time, over the pandemic, there's been more building and construction going on. I'm seeing like large size drywall. So it looks like there's been another room added, you know, and there's no permits. There's nothing on this place, like nothing.
Yeah. Do you have any input on this one, Liz?
So, yeah, I do, Chris. You know, again, if you want to go ahead and I'll send you my email address. You can go ahead and send me the information. And if there is an active investigation, I can at least point you in the direction of who might be doing that investigation. But you mentioned about materials, and typically materials aren't regulated until there's a permit involved. When there's a permit involved, then you have to call out what you're building this out of, because then there's a spot check to make sure you're using the appropriate dimension of lumber, the appropriate dimension of the drywall. So, permit gets introduced to the process. Then, and then there's some assurance. So I'll go ahead and I'll put my email in the chat for everyone to see, and I would be happy to at least point you in the direction of whoever might be investigating. And if it's not being investigated, then perhaps that might be a clue here. Send in a complaint. I mean, I can also I can put in the web address for how you make a complaint at the City of Seattle, and it'll be directed to whatever department within the division would be the investigating person. Pardon?
Oh, sorry. It is
No, go ahead.
investigated. And I did talk to the investigator, and she asked me questions about things that I hadn't seen. So it sounds like there's a lot of concern, at least on her part, for what she's been able to see from the right of way. But I just wanted to, I want to learn, because I'm interested in a little bit, but I also want to stay safe. And I also, I don't want to complain unless there's a good reason, but when that fire pit went in, that was it, because I had seen so many people coming and going, and, drunk parties, and, constructions, no permit, plant on the roof, and then boom, until then she wasn't really, to me, she wasn't dangerous, but that fire thing went in, and it's right on top of my building's fence. So boom, it's right on top of the fence. So if that thing catches on fire, it's going to hit that fence. It's going to go right into my apartment.
So is this a single family residence, or is this a multifamily property?
It's a single family home that she's turned into, 5 or 6 rentals with no permit.
Then there's that. And that can be questionable. You've got my email address. If you want to send me the address, I can check to see if it's registered with our rental registration program. And if it's not, and it's required, perhaps that'll be another avenue that an investigation started and accountability will be had. I mean, I think the best thing that we can offer here as code compliance is accountability. If there's something that addresses the problem, we want to get to the bottom of it, and we want to make people accountable and hold them to the standard. That's what community development's all about, holding people to the standards of the community.
The basement unit that she put in illegally, because there's no permit on that. Well, I don't know if it was illegal. That's why I want to know, legal or illegal.
You've got my email address.
Thank you. That one's registered, but the others aren't.
Yeah, so things like basement units will require a permit, to establish them legally. Yes.
And in the City of Seattle, do have to be habitable, and they do have to be safe. I mean, that's the bottom line. It's all about safety and community standards.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Great questions. Okay, the floor is open. We're taking any questions here related to code compliance. Feel free to chime in, raise your hand, put it in the chat.
This is Sharon again. I don't know how many people are on the call, but I have another one unless somebody else that hasn't spoken is ready. You have someone else, or shall I go?
You can go. Go ahead.
Okay. So, new construction. There was a new construction that just completed next door to my place on Queen Anne. And there we use an unimproved alley. What was an unimproved alley? The construction lasted an entire year, almost to the day. There were gigantic trucks that have degraded the alley. And I still don't have a clear understanding. I'm working with SDOT, and they're working with the developer to remediate the alley, to undo the damage. But I don't know what he was originally required to do, or what I've said all along the alley needs to be paved. And the developer has not done anything except put some gravel in there that has caused more problems because it keeps shifting and making like mountains and hills and moving. In fact, if you walk on it, you can fall. It shifts under your feet. So what do you require of these developers? And why is it taking so long? SDOT is trying to get him to comply with putting some kind of asphalt or something, and I'm not sure what he's actually required to do. It sounds like the code only required him to do something in front of his 50 feet of alley frontage, but he's ruined the entire alley.
Great question. So, again, I would have to dig into that particular permit as a code compliance inspector to figure out exactly what they were required, what the permitting department required them to do. However, I have seen other permits in the past only require the frontage, or the behind their property to be paved. And then obviously, they usually create access if that isn't there. And I think the thinking is that property by property, eventually that whole alley will get paved. But I'm pretty sure the only requirement is in front of their property only.
So if his construction has damaged the rest of the alley, and if he's put, for example, gravel or some temporary surface on the rest of the alley that is in front of two other homes, shouldn't he be required to fix it to a standard that makes it drivable or, permanently and not just temporarily? I mean, what do you do about that?
Yeah, I'm gonna assume so, but again, I'd have to look into the permit to see what we required. But if there's nothing specifically in there, then it would be on, SDOT to enforce that damages caused in the right of way.
Damage SDOT.
Mhm.
Okay.
But I'd be interested to see exactly what that permit said and what was required in that. If in the permit somewhere it does say that a condition of that permit was to keep that alley safe and drivable and usable with a certain type of material, then that's definitely something that us in code compliance can enforce. It would be a condition of that permit that was issued.
Before they started construction, when I went to the 20th floor and went to the desk, they told me, and I called, they said he was required to pave, at least in front of his property. But
Yes.
then he said no, he wasn't, that he only had to, I forget what the surface was. I mean, what is standard? What do you, if the alley is unimproved to start with, what do y'all usually require?
Yes, again, so that's more of a permit specific question, but what I've seen from the permits that I've had investigations on, they typically only pave in front of their property.
But do you actually require pavement? Or is there some, I forget what else that they call it, like blocks or something, I forget.
It would all be in the permit. It all depends on what's happening. And the planner would have consulted with the developer and they would have come up with an approved solution. But you're asking about the material, and as mentioned, us in code compliance typically don't deal with material unless it's specifically called out in the permitting process, which it is most of the time. So I wouldn't be able to give you a straight answer for that site just because I would have to see what was told of the developers to do, and then we would have some type of enforcement depending on what we find there. But I would assume that other things are allowed than just gravel or pavement. It just depends.
I have a question.
Oh, yes. Good morning.
Good morning. Following up on alleys, the developer of a humongous, it's now almost four stories, accessory dwelling unit, kitty corner from me, has been occupying the alley that gives access to two of us to our garages for, I don't know, 6-7 months now. And their habit is to work out in the alley and block the access to our garages. It's been going on for months. I've asked them several times to clean up, because one of the things that they do is they leave nails all over the alley. Plus, they leave all their construction, detritus up against my fence, up against, all over the access area. And nothing really happens. They clean it up for a minute, and then the next day they're back at it again. And partly because he has different crews coming in and they don't talk to each other.
Mm-hmm.
What is the obligation that they have in regards to maintaining the access clear?
Sure. So depending on what's happening, if it's a public alley, then they have to maintain it clear from alley edge to alley edge. However, that's enforced by SDOT, unfortunately, not by us. I say unfortunately because I can't help you, but they definitely can. If it was vegetation that was encroaching and it was a paved alley, we definitely have enforcement over the vegetation only. However, you mentioned they had different crews coming in. So if a business was being run out of the property itself, then that would be considered a home occupation. And under the zoning ordinances, we do have regulations for home occupations, things
Well,
like...
it's not, wait, excuse me. It's
Sure.
that they're building the thing, and the crews are working on different aspects of the building.
Oh, I see. They're in the middle of construction.
They are.
Yeah, so typically, SDOT would give them right-of-way permits if they're allowed to work in the right-of-way. If they don't have a permit, then, that's definitely something SDOT will want to look into.
Okay. The other thing, while I have you, there's been a lot of there is and has been construction for the past 5-6 years behind me, and to the southwest, to the southeast, to the south, and it's just been awful, noisy, and damaging to some of the nice stuff. When the construction to the south of me happened, again, this is what would have been an alley, except that it's, by alley standards, it's too small, so it's not really an alley. It's basically dead-ending and not useful as an alley, except to the two people who have garages.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things that they did was they damaged the retaining wall at the dead end of this thing, which is on my property, basically. And now I have to, in order to restore, because there's a 4-foot or more drop to the next property, I'm going to have to build a retaining wall to replace the retaining wall that was there.
With a permit, right?
Well, I don't know who to talk to about this. It's basically SDOT would be in charge of alleys, right?
Of the alley, yes, but the private property would be you.
Right, except that it's just so complicated. There was a retaining wall because there's a 4-foot drop, and there would be a landslide otherwise into the property. Right now, it's even more of a dead end than it was, because the property that's being built up is not going to use that end of their abutting to me space. So I'm left with a gaping hole at the corner of my property where the dead alley is. And it has to be plugged. I mean, otherwise it's just a landslide looking to happen. Who do I talk to about, because I had a retaining wall at that end, but the people to the south of me destroyed it and left a hole. So now what? Because it's $4,000 to me to rebuild. The property owner is like totally not even locatable. The one that damaged the retaining wall. So does SDOT have a responsibility to replace the retaining wall, or is it on me?
Yeah, so if it's on your property, then it would be your responsibility, unfortunately. And if it was caused by somebody else, then there's definitely a civil suit there.
Okay, and neither the city nor SDOT has any say-so about, compelling the person who damaged it to do anything.
I don't believe so, because we permit what happens on their property, and then we can't control or manage what they do outside of that. So that's more of them having kind of bad business practices.
Okay, thanks. One last question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Totally different issue, same problem of new construction doing things. The people to the south of me have lights that are shining now straight into my house. I mean, it's like I'm like more than 50 feet away, and the lights from inside their place or out in their parking lot shine all the way to the front of my house, right through me, the middle of my house. And is there any obligation that they have to not have that happen?
Yes, so that we can help you with. So yes, any spotlights on the outside of properties need to be shielded and directed away from adjacent properties. So that's almost like what we would consider light trespassing onto your property. You could submit a complaint. We'll send somebody else. They'll go out at night and make sure all of those are shielded and pointed down and away from other people's private property.
Thank you. Who do I contact about this?
My department. I think we could put. I'm sorry?
Could you put some kind of a link that I could copy?
Yes. I will look for that now, and a phone number as well.
How about if I look for the link and the phone number, and if you could address Patsy's question regarding tree cutting, please?
Yes.
I will get information to caller number 5.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes. What about tree cutting?
Hi, this is Patsy. So I recently moved into my house, and there is a tree, probably about 6 to 8 feet from my driveway, and it's totally hanging over my carport roof. I was told it was a magnolia tree, which I believe is considered an exceptional tree by the city. And I guess I'm trying to just confirm what exactly the process is, because I'm going to have to hire someone to take it down. But I just want to know, do I have to get a permit, even though it's basically encroaching on my house, and kind of how that all works?
Great question and great one to ask, actually. So many people cut down trees all over Seattle. They're on their private property, and you ask the perfect questions. Can I cut this down? Is it maybe exceptional, etc.? If you were to cut it down, we would go out there, and there could be heavily fines imposed for cutting it without a permit, depending on the value of the tree. Now, is it exceptional or not? We're not sure. So it all depends. It depends on the species. It depends on the size. So we have a list of a lot of exceptional trees, and they all have different kind of breaking points of when they become exceptional. Some could be exceptional at 12 inches diameter at breast height. Some can be 30 inches, and typically anything that's over 30 inches we consider exceptional regardless of if they're on that list or not. So what you would do, how you would go about getting a tree removed is I highly recommend, especially if you do think it's exceptional and it's pretty large in size, that you hire an arborist to go and look at it. And then you have to kind of make a case for why you have to remove it. And you would do that both with the arborist and with the planning department and our arborists. Because, you know, some of the questions they would ask is it causing damages to your property? Instead of removing the tree, can you trim some of those limbs up, and keep that, you know, that feature of your property? Things like that would be considered. If it's an obvious hazard, then they may allow you to just remove it. But definitely an arborist first and then a permit.
So just to clarify, so it's the arborist, they're going to be the ones who are going to make the determination of whether it falls under the exceptional tree definition. Like they're the ones who are going to do that, because obviously I have no clue.
Totally.
About
So
trees. So,
yeah, so their job typically has a lot more than just that. So they would like analyze the tree, the size, if it's diseased in any way, the location, kind of how, you know, if it's going to survive in that location, if it's better to be moved, if it should just be cut down and removed. You know, they'll take a lot of things into consideration.
okay.
Yeah. So it just depends. They'll give you all the information about that tree.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much.
No problem. Thank you. Great question. And yes, if you're going to cut down a tree, you know, ask the questions because they're expensive.
And I put a tip sheet in the chat. And as far as tip sheets are concerned, I love Mrs. Google. Mrs. Google, just type in the tip sheet, put Seattle tip sheet, whatever number, and boom, it'll pop up on your screen. Mrs. Google's wonderful.
Okay, floor is open. Anybody have any questions?
Okay, I'll follow up with another tree question. This is
Yes.
Sharon. So, my neighbors and I sued, went to the hearing examiner to save an exceptional tulip tree on this development project that I just alluded to regarding the alley. We're not able to save that magnificent tree. It was even featured on the front page of the Seattle Times.
Wow.
So the code says that if you do cut down an exceptional tree, you're supposed to replant another tree that at maturity will have the same canopy as the one that was removed. So now the project is complete and there's a tiny little tree, maybe 6 feet tall or 7 feet tall, that has if it lives, there's no way in God's earth it could ever attain a big canopy because it's got about 6 feet on either side. It's like about 6 feet from the building next to it. And so who's following up? Who regulates that? There's no way that this tree in 50 years, 60, 80 years is going to, it probably won't live, but there's no way it can attain the canopy like the magnificent tree that was cut down. And I want to know what mechanisms the city has to follow up or to make sure the code is being followed, because this is happening all over the city. We're losing our magnificent tree canopies.
Yes, great question. So, great question and a difficult one for me to answer. So, I've been in a lot of meetings regarding trees and trees around Seattle, and exactly what you're bringing up is definitely a concern that we have and that many citizens around Seattle have, because we don't have a great mechanism for that. So, you know, we're looking at creating or trying to create some sort of a tree registry when we could actually document when an exceptional tree is removed and then what we require to be planted and be maintained in the future. So we're creating that list now. We're working all of that out. It's very complicated. And in addition, in code compliance, again, we kind of deal with things either before they have a permit or after the permit has been finalized. The time in between is handled by, building inspectors. And so in the future, we would probably require and put some type of a condition in that permit that says for the life of the permit, the tree has to be living, healthy, etc. And if it dies, it must be replaced again. If that's a particular, if it's very specifically in the permit as a condition, then we would be able to enforce under the code compliance, our policies. We'd be able to enforce on that condition. But currently, if we don't have that found, then there is not a great mechanism to follow up, as you mentioned, in 50 or 60 years. But we're working to get there for sure, very soon.
Okay. So can you guys go out and say there's no way, we don't like where this tree was placed, there's no way that this tree is going to be able to attain a large canopy like the one that was removed, and do something about that?
So no, it's more difficult once the permit has been finalized, because our arborists have already looked at that site and they're the ones that approved the location of the new tree, and then even the replacement tree. They're the ones that approve all of that. And then a site inspector goes out to make sure that the developer has basically constructed everything on site that they told us they were going to do in plans. And once it's signed off, then that's almost finalized. They've said it's okay the way it sits.
They haven't gotten the final permit yet on the property, on the project.
Right. So then they've received most likely approved plans. And so again, our arborists have already looked at those plans and have made the best recommendation for the tree with the help of the developer. And they've all agreed and said it's okay. Now it's on the site inspector who goes out for the final to make sure that the tree is actually in that location and not somewhere else, or that they forgot to actually plant the tree or something like that. So that's kind of the relationship the site inspectors and the planners have.
So there's no recourse against SDCI or anybody else for allowing that tree to go there up against the edge of the building when it should have been out in an open space with room for the canopy to explode.
Well, not that there has to be any recourse, because again, our arborists looked at it and said that was an okay location for the tree.
So to follow up on vegetation, according to the developer, he is not required to have any kind of a plan to maintain or water the vegetation. Once the building is up, the units, the 3 row house, or well, there are 5 row houses and townhouses are currently up for sale, and he has no instructions to maintain the landscaping. He's just assuming that once people buy it, they'll take care of it. But in the meantime, why has SDCI not put instructions for him to maintain it to ensure that it lives healthfully?
Sure. So, I don't know. That would be more of the planner side of things. They're the ones that make the requirements, and then us in code compliance would enforce what's written once finalized. So, kind of similar to yourself, we would look at these permits, we would look at the plans, and if nothing was written there to specifically say you must maintain this, you must water it this many times a week or whatever, then there's very little enforcement that we can conduct on that site. If the planners specifically write instructions like that on there and there are conditions of that permit, then that's definitely something that we can enforce as code compliance. It's not something that we have a say in the process.
So are you saying, Edwin, there's nothing in the code that is standard that requires developers to maintain the landscaping until new owners take over the units?
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying it all depends on every permit that's issued and every site. It depends on a lot of factors. It's just not something that code compliance deals with until after it's been set in stone by the planners of the department. So, it's not something that me as a code compliance inspector would tell the property owner, you have to maintain this. me in code compliance, just depending on the permit, would open that up, look through it, and see what was required by our planners. If something like a watering plan or something like that is required, then we could enforce it. If they made the determination that in this site they cannot require it for some reason, then we cannot require it either. It just depends. There's definitely sites, way bigger sites where we do require, where plants have died and we've gone back out and made them replant things. It just depends.
So Sharon, typically what Edwin's talking about here is it's got to be there in the permit. Remember we talked about permits legitimize the project, and the permit would in this case what you're asking for is if the permit has a vegetation management requirement. If the permit doesn't have that vegetation management requirement, the city code enforcement inspectors, we can't make a property owner do anything unless that requirement is in the permit and it's been established, legitimized, legalized. That's the only time we can go ahead and require someone to water plants or to maintain a plant, feed it, replace it if it dies, but that has to be in the permit. Does that help?
Yes, I just can't understand why the code doesn't require the planners to provide for that. That's what I'm not understanding.
I'm not saying it doesn't. It's definitely a possibility, but each individual permit is potentially different.
Mhm.
Yeah, and many people express your frustration on that. That's why we're looking into changing the ordinance to make it more specifically required every time.
That would be great.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's great.
And your input, Edwin, what I'm going to say here, your input, that's what you have legislators for. If that's something that you want to see, that's what you have legislators for. And you need to let your opinion be known to that legislator.
Mm.
Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Frustrating, but it helps, I guess.
Yes, just know if it is on the permit, we can definitely enforce it.
Unfortunately, go ahead. Sorry, Edwin, didn't mean to talk over you.
That was it. Thank you.
So unfortunately, right now, because of the pandemic, you can't go in and take a look at what the permit says. When we are open for business again, one of the best things that I ever did was I went to the permit department and I saw all those permits, and they're available for your review. You can take a look at these documents. You can make an appointment with coaching, find out how to look at the document, and then you can research the permit and you can see what the requirements of that permit are. And it's something, to me, it was very fascinating because they have permit documents that go back to, when the city of Seattle was incorporated. So if you're a history buff, it's just an amazing place to go and take a look. So when we open up for business, I encourage you to go down there.
Don't want the plants to die in the meantime.
Oh, I hear you.
Recourse. And I'm really concerned about the so-called exceptional tree replacement, and why nobody's monitoring that or how that got approved. If the code specifically does say, because I researched it, that you need to plant a tree that in maturity is going to have about the same canopy. So why it would have been this replacement tree would have been approved to be put in that spot is something that concerns me. But it doesn't sound like there's any recourse. So
there's transparency, and then there's accountability, and you can ask that question.
Okay, the floor is open. Do we have any other questions?
Hi, Brittany.
Yes, I can barely hear you, but I can hear you.
Are you home
You sound really far away. Okay, maybe that wasn't for us.
Would you like to put your question into the chat? Can you do that? Although you're a call-in user, I guess you can't do that.
Okay, Chris, I saw you in mute. You got something for us?
I do. I have a follow-up question.
Yes.
I don't
But
want
I'm
to
a
hear
little
her.
confused asking.
Biggest, this takes, you said it takes 1 hour. 1 hour for your help.
Hey, can you mute caller number 6?
It's
Yes, we will be doing that. Thank you.
So if a unit, I don't know what to call this, is in the rental registry, does that mean that it was built, that the city has also determined that that unit was built legally?
No. Do you want to answer this one, Liz?
Yeah. Yeah, that, Chris, that's a really great question. And there was a lot of consternation about that question. The rental registration and inspection ordinance does not look at whether or not a rental unit was established by permit. Because what they were trying to do is they were trying to address the lack of affordable housing. So they weighed, we want affordable housing, but we want to make sure it's safe. Typically, a permit establishes the legitimacy and establishes how it was built. Some rental units were established without permit, but they're perfectly safe. We confirm that by an inspection, a rental registration inspection. The property owner, when they register it, makes a declaration that it meets the registration standards. And then the inspection happens at some later date to confirm that. So because they made a conscious decision not to require that the unit was established by permit, they follow it up with a safety inspection, so to speak. Now, if you, as a tenant, find that there's something that you think is unsafe, you can make a complaint to the city saying that there's a condition that I think is unsafe. And I think it's a violation of the code because the unit was not established with a permit. It was built without a permit. I don't think there were permits. I mean, there's multiple ways to phrase it to get the point across. What will happen then is a housing and zoning inspector will come in and they'll investigate, was it built with a permit? If it wasn't built with a permit, they'll require a permit to be established. The inspections will happen. The unit will be legitimized, or if it can't be legitimized, say that there's problems with egress, they will require, although they can't do it right now because of the eviction moratorium, they will require, if it is unsafe, that it be vacated and closed. And the property owner cannot establish it as a living unit or a rental unit. So there was a lot of thought given to this program, and it's not perfect, and it's improving every year that it's in existence. Does that help?
It does. Pre-pandemic, the building was an Airbnb hotel almost solely.
Mm-hmm.
Post-pandemic, I've noticed that the renters are looking different. There's a lot of renters on this property. There's a lot of people that come. It's like living next to a hotel. And if that's something legally that can be stopped in some way, I do want it to stop. So yeah. Go ahead.
No, I'm just agreeing with you. And right about the same time that the pandemic occurred, just prior to that, that's when the city instituted their short-term rental program as well. So short-term rental units are required to be registered with the rental registration inspection program. And then they're also subject to inspection. So this happened almost simultaneously, the pandemic and short-term rentals.
How many short-term rentals can somebody have in one single-family house?
I am not the expert on that. If you want me to answer that question, shoot it to me in an email and I will get you the answer. I can't tell you. I think I want to say, my brain is saying, Liz, it's 3 rooms in addition to what the property owner occupies. I want to say that they can have 3, bedrooms within their house, but I can't tell you why I'm remembering that. I can't see the print in front of my face, so I want to confirm that. But that's where my brain is going.
Yeah,
Edwin,
so
do you remember?
Yeah, if the owner lives on site, then I believe they could rent all the rooms if they want, as long as they live in there. If they have a detached something, and this is all kind of brand new that changed with the new short-term rental licensing requirements that FAS now has. So as Liz mentioned, in addition to requiring that they be registered with Rio, they are also required to obtain a short-term rental license with FAS as well as a business license with FAS. So they have to have 3 things in order to operate short-term rentals now. Again, if it's the owner that lives there, I believe, it's kind of fair game inside the house with the owner living there. If the owner lives in the principal house and they rent something in the back, then that's okay. However, if the owner has their own house, then I believe they're able to use that for short-term rental, and they're allowed to have 1 more somewhere else in the city of Seattle. But that's it. They limited it to that. So, it's most likely going to be hard to regulate how many bedrooms they're renting out, but that would be more FAS. I'm going to assume that they're going to say, we have issued a short-term rental license for this one property, so they're allowed to do it. However, if they have lock separations, then they could consider each bedroom a unit, almost like an apartment building. And so they would only allow 1 bedroom to be rented in that case. But again, if the whole house is up for grabs, then that would be the 1 unit would be the entire home.
What's FAS?
Our finance and administrative services, I believe.
That's correct.
Yes,
That's right.
And they basically issue all the licenses in Seattle, including taxi licenses, Uber, restaurant licenses, business licenses, short-term rental licenses. They deal with all of that.
See, okay, thank you. That answers my question. Thank you.
Yeah, great question. Thank you.
I'm gonna shoot you a tip sheet in the chat, Chris. But this will only be for I'll put it for everybody. It's the short-term rental tip sheet for Department of Construction and Inspections. It's not FAS's tip sheet. But again, Mrs. Google's wonderful.
Okay, floor is open. Do we have anybody else with questions?
So I just wanted.
Yes.
There was one last thing I want to say. I did look up on Google how many bedrooms you can rent in one house in Seattle, and I couldn't find an answer. So I don't know either.
Let me see if I can find it for you right now. Yeah, so when it comes to the regulations in Seattle, I don't recommend you look at Google. The tip sheets, Google the tip sheets, those are perfect.
Yeah.
But when it comes to the actual regulations, you'd want to look in our actual code. And so again, there's kind of a couple ways you can do that. You could come in for kind of free coaching, and they would give you a couple of minutes to ask questions. You could on normal business hours, you could come into the 19th floor of the Seattle Municipal Tower and actually meet with a code compliance inspector, and we could kind of talk like we are now. And we'd bring up the code, things like that. And you could also Google Muni Code, and that is available. That's kind of the software agency that regulates or that houses all the municipal codes nationwide. So they have Seattle's there as well.
Okay, thank you.
I'll put Muni code in the chat. And like I said, Mrs. Google, if you put in Seattle tip sheet and then the number, it'll bring it right to it, and that'll be something that will start you on your path.
Good.
Go.
Okay, the floor is open. Do we have any other questions while we continue to look at this?
I'll keep asking questions if you don't have new callers. I can't believe you don't have 200 callers today.
Well, we have people here, but please, anybody can ask questions. So please, if you have another one.
Yeah, I don't want to, take up all the space if nobody else is asking. So back to my original roof deck question on the row house. Again, are people allowed to put, like the hot tub, the underground or the under whatever deck hot tub, that's illegal? Is there a clear-cut answer to that?
I believe that's illegal.
Okay, then I'm looking out, I'm uphill, and this is about half a block away. I see a giant umbrella. I see one of those outdoor heaters. I'm told there's a bar, like where you go and get mixed drinks or whatever. In addition to this structure that's 8 feet tall, 6 feet wide, and about 6 feet long, and about 3 feet wide, that houses the television. Are you allowed to put electrical wiring up on top of the roof? Or do you just need a permit?
Most likely, yes. Again, I don't know what's occurring at this property, but if they have a rooftop deck, then there's going to be electrical up there. But yes, most people can put electrical wiring up on their roof if they need it.
Okay.
That would be allowed. The things that I would be, they would need a permit if they don't have one. But the things that really stick out to me are the structures that are erected, up above the height of that home. Those would definitely need permits, and that's what we would look at, or they would not be allowed if it's already built to that height limit.
So I went to water a plant a couple of weeks ago and looked out my window that looks north, and I see what looks like an LED sign up in the air, in the sky, on essentially the fourth floor, with this giant TV. I'm watching football about in the air, and I couldn't believe it. There's this big giant screen TV. It looked like my hotel in Las Vegas when I looked out the window and saw one of those big electronic signs. So forget the structure. That's my next question about the structure it's in. But what about having the TV up there in the middle of the sky, so to speak, in the dark night? It's not down on the floor. In other words, it's not down on the floor below the railing. It's up in this 8-foot high structure, which is above the floor of the roof deck.
Yeah, I would think that, if the electrical was put on there legally, people can connect anything they want up there.
They can have I'm in a low-rise one neighborhood. You can't have an electronic sign up there flashing in the middle of the night. That's essentially what the TV is.
Right, but the TV isn't on all night, and somebody's typically up there with the TV. I think it would be very difficult for us to try to tell somebody they can't put the TV there.
They can put it up. Well, it's in this structure. Now that gets back to the structure and whether it can be built on the roof.
Yes, totally. But if the structure was allowed, we definitely wouldn't touch the TV, right? The sign,
Really?
I could see us looking into, but not the TV. But that's again assuming the structure is allowed, which it really sounds like it's not.
And the structure, in addition, you know how you have the housing for the stairway that comes up that's
Yes.
on top of every one of these roof decks?
Hmm.
They built the structure, what's the right word? Adjacent to it. In other words,
Oh.
not up against the wall of it, but in where the structure for the stairway ends. Then they put another 6-foot wide structure. So now over almost half the roof, there's a structure standing up 8 feet, which blocks, like I used to be able to look over and see the lights of Finney Ridge in the distance. Now it's blocked. So they're covering more, you know what I'm saying? They're raising the height of the roof essentially. So how does that sound? Are you understanding what I'm saying?
Totally. And so again, in these mixed in these low-rise zones, they are allowed. There are additional things that can be built above the height limit, like the stair enclosure, but they're
Right.
very specific. The code is very specific about what we allow, right? The stair enclosure. That means everything else most likely is not permitted.
Okay, thank you. That
Mhm.
if that structure is not permitted, that would solve that TV problem.
Yes. Yes. And
I mean,
again,
I don't have a problem with them putting a TV as long as it's down low, and they sit in a chair and watch it down on the floor of their unit. It's up in the air though. It's like 8 feet high.
right. And so the reason that one is so tricky is because we would normally allow a TV up there. If they do have a rooftop deck and somebody just takes a TV out, there's no way we would do anything about that. However, they've done a lot more. So, you know, there's definitely something we can do, but we just have to look into it a little bit more.
Okay, it's the height of the TV that's the problem.
Yeah, so if the structure comes down, the TV will come down with it.
Thank you.
Hmm. Okay, floor is open.
I'm having a heck of a time being able to do this from my phone, just to let you know. I can't see the comments. I can't, if anytime Elizabeth says something about posting something,
Mm-hmm.
I can no longer see what's being posted. And I'm trying to get in from my computer, and it's not working. I'm trying to pick out what the URL might be, and I cannot get the portal to lead me there. So, and it's just an FYI. It may not be getting enough participation because people are having the same problem I'm having.
Thank you. I'm downloading the app now, so I'll try to help with that if I can. You should be able to still access everything, but let me see if I could kind of help with that. Most likely you're gonna have to click on the screen of whatever you see on there, and then you should have kind of like a small chat bubble that you could click, with your finger, and that'll pop up what is being displayed in the chat, I'm assuming. But again, I will look into that right now. Thank you for letting me know.
Well, yeah, it's posting the chats, but it's not. Actually, it's not posting the chat. It's posting captions of what people are saying, which is not the same.
Yes.
Yeah,
so
we have the closed caption on as well. And that's
the closed caption. I'm getting that. I'm getting the captioning, but I'm not getting, like, whenever you say you're going to post X, your email or whatever. at one point I saw it, and then since then I have not, and I don't know what it is I'm not doing. I don't see it on any of the little gadgets and gadgets that are, you know, on the bar above, on the bar right below that, and all that. None of it. It just isn't there.
Does that, I
So-
just closed mine. Did that impact yours? Can you see
right
the chat now?
all I'm getting is this Seattle Home Fairs and the sort of the little poster of this particular workshop.
Okay,
And
so you
then
can't see.
the captions, and a little bit of menu down below, but it's like the little blue bubble thing and the smiley face thing, and then that's it. I can't get anything else.
Yeah, so if you look on your website up above on the top right, do you have like a picture of a little person with kind of a hamburger?
Hamburger.
You
No,
know, on the
hamburger. You mean 3 lines, you mean?
yes, the 3 lines.
Yeah, right. I do get
So-
that. And what I get from that is a list of participants.
Yes, and then down below, do you see there's a chat button?
I see the chat, and all there is with the chat is Elizabeth saying, please send us your questions, and then we are happy to help. And that's it.
So that was my last post. Can you scroll up? Let's see.
No.
Okay. I'm scrolling currently. Can you see, is it changing on your end?
Yes.
Now I see a Sean Mann. For late entrance, the chat history will not be available.
Yes. So the history will only be available up until when you logged into the meeting.
Well, I logged into the meeting quite a while ago, but
Really?
all I've got now is 4 comments, and they are very recent. So anyway, it's been a problem. Like, you know, when I called in, I expected to just write my question, and I couldn't do that because there wasn't any way to do it. And chatting was the only way I could do it, so I did that. But I couldn't see anything posted in response. So, okay, what is that? Something just went in a bar.
Okay, so
across the top.
what I'm doing is I'm reposting some of the links that I had put in earlier.
Right, and okay, I see your library Municode thing.
Okay, so here's, I just posted business regulations for short-term rentals.
Okay, got that one.
And then regulation.
These things are showing up now on the chat. Nothing from before.
Okay,
And,
well, I'm scrolling back and trying to get that to you. I'm going to put how you can make a complaint. Put that link in now.
What I'm going to have to do with these, it's going to disappear off the top of my list here any second. So what I'm going to have to do with these is copy and paste them into something, which means leaving this screen and then coming back to get the next one and so on. Just so you know, that's what's going on. Or I can take a picture of it, I suppose. But the limitations of doing this on a phone, I guess, are such.
Yes, if you don't leave the chat, if you don't leave the actual meeting, even though it's going above, you will be able to scroll down and still see that history. As soon as you close down the app, that will most likely disappear.
Right. Well, I wasn't closing down the app before. And again, any chat that happened before Elizabeth said, please send us your questions, which I was present for that before that. It's not showing up on the screen. All I get is, you know, the most recent stuff. But anyway, I just took a picture of all these things that Elizabeth posted. Thank you for doing that.
Yeah, and thank you for letting us know. I'm sorry about that.
And I'm gonna also put my email address back in there. And I believe once this program is over today, we'll have a recording. All this is being recorded into the cloud. and we can send you the link to what was said, and you can, I think there'll even be a transcript, if that helps
Okay,
you.
will all these little referrals show up in that version?
They should, yes, they should.
Okay, good, thank you.
Hi, it's Sharon again. Can I ask another question? So I'm
Please.
thinking of turning my garage into 1 or 2 rental units. How would I start? What would I do?
Yeah, great question. So you would definitely need a permit, right? So it's kind of a long process. You would need to hire an architect, hire a contractor, and then kind of start talking with them. It is something that we would allow. You would be able to convert your garage into an additional unit. Um, Having two might be a little bit more difficult. You can have now a detached accessory dwelling unit. So if you had a garage in your backyard and then you wanted to put a basement unit so that you have 3 in total,
Right,
that would.
I'm in a low rise one area, and
Oh, you're in a low rise.
I already own a duplex, so
Perfect. So yes, you would still be allowed to, is it a detached garage or attached
it
to the
is.
home?
Well, it's connected by a breezeway, a walkway. It's basically detached.
Perfect. So yes, you would be able to do that. You would just need a permit for it. And that would, it would kind of be a long process. The contractor would help you through that. And then you would probably come in for coaching with one of our planners to look into the regulations on that. But it is allowed.
So would I get architectural plans first, or would I come in to the 20th floor first at the Muni building when it opens? I mean, what's the process exactly?
Hmm. Yeah, I would say you would want to speak to a contractor first. And they would kind of help you through that process. Somebody that's familiar with building DADUs and ADUs in Seattle.
Okay, but don't I need to check the codes first downtown to make sure I have the proper plumbing or whatever, electrical? I guess I'm not sure because contractors and architects are real expensive. So before I go to that step, that's why I was wondering what I need to do at the city, if anything, first.
Yeah, I mean, building a DADU is expensive, and hiring a contractor is part of that to do it correctly. Because you're building it in the garage, all of that's going to have to be looked at by the contractor and then by the city, the plumbing, the insulation, the fixtures, things like that. So again, usually the contractor comes in, they give you a bid, they tell you everything that's going to be needed, and then you present that to the city. Yeah. If you go now, they're just going to tell you kind of what I'm saying. It is allowed, but submit a pre-application and get started on permitting.
Thank you.
Sharon, I sent you the tip sheet reference in the chat.
116B.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
That'll start you in the right direction. Just remember that your garage was built not to house people. It was built to house cars. And there's different building standards for cars and people. So what'll have to happen is your garage will probably have to be brought to the standard to house people. So there's going to be some changes to the structure, perhaps insulation, perhaps, augmented electrical. There's going to have to be windows for egress and ventilation. So there's going to be some structural changes probably to your garage because it wasn't built to house people, just cars.
Right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
There's a lot to think about.
There sure is.
Tip sheet.
Yep. And we also have, not with Seattle Department of Construction and Inspections, but the Office of Community Development, or OCDR, something like that. They actually have pre-approved plan sets that you could use for inspiration or to look at for DADUs and ADUs, and that's OCR. Let me look for their website on that. OPCD, sorry, Office of Planning and Community Development.
Thank you.
Thank you, and I'll put that in the chat as well. Okay, the floor is open. So again, Edwin Duran here, Senior Housing Zoning Inspector, and Elizabeth Krasminski, Senior Housing Zoning Inspector. And we're just talking about anything code compliance related, housing zoning, so anything related to rental properties, the RIO program, and then anything related to the land use side of the code as well.
I can't believe this is like a private consult. I'll just keep going. Have they removed the parking?
Yes.
Like if I had 3 units, how many parking places would I have to have in low-rise 1? 3 rental units, or 3 units total, or 4 units?
Good question. So it all depends on the zone that you're in. There's some zones that where we don't require parking, and that's like in high transit areas. However, typically you need 1 parking space per unit, except that, just like you mentioned, when you're building a new DADU, accessory dwelling unit, whether it's detached or attached, they removed the parking requirements for those additional units. So currently you need 1 parking space per unit, but if you get a permit to establish a DADU or an ADU, then the requirement for parking on those has been removed. You would still be required to maintain parking for the other units, however. Yes, good question.
What else? Oh, another. Are any views protected in the city of Seattle?
Are any views protected?
Yeah, I mean, like this, like we'll go back to that rooftop structure, which blocked part of my view, what I considered a view. Now I'm looking at that blank wall when I look out. Is there any protection for anything like that? There used to be a code that said the views of the Space Needle were protected from certain points in Seattle. But with all those new high rises going in downtown and like up on Boren there at what do they call that? 4 Columns Park or something. They block the view of the Space Needle. That's something totally different. But I'm wondering about private views, or is there any protection of those under any circumstances?
I kind of like stuttered a little bit there because it's almost a yes and no question. So no, not typically, but there are weird situations that I've seen where views are protected. Sometimes there's private residences that donated, a portion of their property to be a public park with a condition that they could always trim for a view. They could trim the trees. They could top the trees for a view. And that's very, very rare because we obviously don't want tree topping in Seattle. I've only seen that maybe once. But no, not typically. There isn't anything that specifically says, your view is protected. Usually that's done through the zoning requirements, just like you mentioned with the Space Needle, and then everything in the surrounding zones are lowered to protect the views. But that's not necessarily something that's spelled out in the code. It's just the way that our big planners have laid out the city and the way it should function. Yeah, and again, the only kind of requirements that I have seen were kind of private agreements that were made, many years ago.
So I couldn't get that guy to remove that structure based on the fact that he's blocked my view. It's strictly whether it's allowed by code, right? It has to do only with code.
Yes, you are correct.
Okay.
There are communities elsewhere, not in Seattle, that do have view corridors. But I think Edwin's right. I don't think there are any view corridors except for under the condition of a legacy because of a donation of property. I don't think there are view corridors in Seattle. I don't think it's allowed.
Yeah, that's the only time I've seen it, in working here.
Yeah, I think I know what property you're talking about, Edwin.
So if
Yeah.
this guy had built that structure that I've been talking about and put it up against the back of that housing for the stairway where it didn't stick out and come across half the roof,
Mhm.
would that have made a difference? Or still depending on the height, the weight, and whether it's anchored down and all? Does that
Totally.
is that
So
affected by the code? What if he'd leaned it up against the back of the housing?
no, you're totally correct that regardless of the placement of this structure, it would not make a difference. If it's on the top of the roof, it's going to need a permit. And that's if it's allowed. Most likely it's not.
And like and when I called, the inspector I talked to did say that they've had things like I know somebody else a little while ago talked about a plant falling off the top of the roof.
Mhm.
The inspector I talked to did say that they have had mishaps with things blowing off roofs, and they've got a big giant umbrella. Is there a code regarding umbrellas?
No, not specifically.
No, that's considered safe, or does it have to be anchored down, or?
So Sharon, what you might want to think about here is we're not going to say it's safe. What we're going to say is that's an umbrella that's up on a roof, and that probably isn't a good idea in a windstorm. But we're probably not going to say it's regulated because it's just like walking down the street with an umbrella. That can be dangerous too. The wind gets up underneath it and it ends up poking somebody's eye out. But we don't regulate things like that. We don't regulate that kind of behavior. That's a behavior. What we would regulate is a structure, and a structure is something that's built. It's something that's not, there's performance standards that it has to meet. That a structure that's legally built, there's performance standards that has to meet. Like it has to be able to withstand wind with the anchoring. It has to be able to withstand load when it snows. So, the whole idea that this person has a hot tub on the roof, that might violate the load standards for that roof. Now, it might not. The roof might have been built to withstand additional loads. So it's all going to depend on what the review says. The addition of a structure, it has to meet the conditions for the location.
Hmm.
And that doesn't.
The height condition is something. Like I said, the performance. It has to be able to meet the wind shear. It has to be able to the snow load, that kind of thing.
So, like the umbrella, you wouldn't require the umbrella to be bolted down to the roof deck, for example?
If it's going to be, if it's a permanent feature, they would look into that, right? But if it's temporary, somebody puts it up today and they take it off at night, and we're able to verify that, then no. We would have very little regulation on that. However, that doesn't mean we wouldn't necessarily do something. If we go out there and it looks unsafe, we have a team that helps us research these properties. And I've had some circumstances where I'd call those owners and say, hey, this is a huge safety hazard. You should consider removing this when nobody's up there, things like that, to avoid somebody getting hurt. And most of the time, people don't think of other people when they're doing things, and they would take that into consideration and remove it.
Yes.
Yeah, we would look more into it if it was there forever. But again, typically people are removing and putting it back on. Again, this case has way more issues, and there's more reasons why you would want that umbrella up there all the time, like this illegal structure, the TV, the neon sign, all these things, which most likely will be removed, including the umbrella as well. We try to help clear everything, and that'll kind of get the little things as well.
Thank you. It's a big umbrella. Thank you. It looks really heavy.
Yeah.
All right.
Years ago, I had an enforcement case where a group of college students had carried up several sofas onto a flat roof, and then they put the fire pit on the roof. That was not a smart thing to do. And then the fire department came out, and the fire department pointed out that wasn't a smart thing to do. And then the fire department contacted the property owner, and this was a rental unit. So you can imagine how many young people were no longer living in that house. So sometimes it takes a lot of different people to get involved to undo an unsafe situation. We'll just leave it at that.
Thank you.
Yeah, we've seen ping pong tables on top of roofs by the frat houses.
Is it common to see this around Seattle on these new flat roof, townhouses, row houses? Are people putting I haven't seen a structure like this as I drive around the city, but
go to the U district. Go to the U district. There's a lot of them around there. You'll see a lot of rooftop decks, but that's what they're built for. They're actually built with a parapet so that you don't have to have a railing system. It's actually built as a rooftop deck. Now, I've also seen some of the more vintage buildings where someone has decided to put a rooftop deck up on the vintage building. That's an apartment building. And then they've taken the no longer usable, I want to say the elevator utility facility, and they've turned that into a rooftop apartment. That was an interesting case. So yeah.
But at what point does something become a fourth illegal floor? Do you know what I mean by having appurtenances attached rather than just being a quote rooftop deck? Is there a standard?
Yes, but it's difficult. We don't want to call it a whole floor because it's not allowed, right? Typically, if it's a newer construction, they've built up to that height requirement. They have a rooftop deck, which is allowed. And then people want to use that a little bit more. So they say, hey, let me build a structure. Let me put a TV. I can put some chairs out here and have a really nice get together. However, that's not allowed. So we are seeing more and more of it as we see more rooftop decks being built. But they've all come down because they're not allowed. Those additional structures that are built on top.
So is there any place I can look, like page whatever of code, whatever, that tells exactly what can go on a rooftop deck?
Yes, give me one. I'll look for that.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay. I'm just reading the chat here. Parking not required for any accessory dwelling unit. Yep, good to go back on that. And the floor is open, so anybody else that has questions while I look for this, feel free to chime in or put it in the chat.
Hi, this is Chris again.
Hi, Chris. Go ahead.
Hey. that's kind of what you guys were just touching on a couple moments ago is the situation. It's like things keep getting added, and it's going between, the fire department will come out, and it's like somewhere in here, it just, I mean, how many decks this lady had? It's like things just keep getting built, and I'm like, and it's usually not one thing that makes something unsafe. It's the addition of, and then they add this, and then they add that, and then when I saw the propane, that's where I was trying to use. It just adds up to this feeling of like general unsafety. You know what I mean?
I hear what you're saying. Propane can be, that's a struggle, because if it gets too hot and it gets too cold, it's going to go. And that's something that the fire department would probably address, not the building department. I mean, I've been known to go out on an inspection and look at something and voice my opinion that doesn't look entirely safe. Do I have the authority to do anything about it? No, sometimes I don't. But, something that people have to think about is she's a property owner. What she's doing on that property, if there is a horrible, horrible mishap, we're going to say, there's going to be some liability there. She's got to have homeowners insurance, and that homeowner insurance is going to dictate what she's going to lose potentially. So, but sometimes we can't regulate behavior. We can regulate what's in the code, and we can only regulate what's in the code. And sometimes people they're not very wise in what their decisions are. They're not good at making decisions. And there are some people out there that don't take into account other people's exposure, we'll say. But they're also exposing themselves to liability.
And that was the final letter I sent. I sent a letter saying, if anything happens to my person or my property, I'm going to take legal action against you. I don't want it to get to this point, but, and, she flips it off, and a very flaky individual is what I'm dealing with. Extremely flaky. Yeah.
There are people that don't make good decisions.
Okay, sorry to cut in here. So I put
Great.
I put two sections in here of the Seattle Municipal Code. The code link is the link to the entire code is in the chat. But basically what you would want to look up is 23.45.514. That's the height requirements for multifamily structures. And then more specifically, point I, or section I should say, is the rooftop features. And so that's going to list what we would typically allow on a rooftop. And so things that are on here are like flagpoles, open railings, planters, parapets, as Liz mentioned, etc. So it's very specific of what's allowed. And the reason that I mentioned rooftop features these are what's usually exempt from that height requirement. They can go a little bit above the height requirement here.
Thank you for that. What about lighting? Does it say anything about lighting?
Well, it's not going to specifically talk about lighting because, the electrical components are going to be allowed through the building process on a rooftop deck, right? So, again, if it's an illegal structure, we'll look at it through the permitting side. But if it's something that's existing, like an outlet that's already there, that would have been looked at through the permit under the electrical code. So it's going to be a little bit different than this.
This particular roof that we've been talking about has lights strung all the way around it, up high. They're not that obtrusive. They're kind of nice, but I just wondered if that's allowed.
Yeah, we would typically allow that. There's, some people leave their Christmas lights on all year. And again, we typically allow it. If it's not something that is obviously shining into other people's properties, we kind of let it go. If it was, sorry, and if it was something that was electrically wired into the house without a permit, then we would definitely call that out. I'm talking about, these temporary kind of Christmas lights is what I'm thinking.
Yeah, these are bigger than Christmas lights, but it's all around the roof. But they're not on all the time. But
Mhm.
can I
Yeah,
ask another question about sidewalks?
yes.
What exactly are we as homeowners are expected to do with regard to sidewalks that may be uneven, for example, because of tree roots, or what's our responsibility?
Sure. So, you know, just from past experience, this is not talking about the SDOT requirements because I'm not too sure what their requirements are. But from past municipalities, it's always kind of the adjacent property's owner's responsibility to maintain that sidewalk. However, what I do know is you're going to need a permit, and those are typically pretty expensive repairs to make, to do them correctly. As far as code compliance is concerned, all we enforce, is the vegetation and make sure that there's an 8 foot clearance for people to walk through without getting hit in the face from a branch or something like that. But again, I think, the actual unevenness of the sidewalk is kind of a safety issue for the pedestrians. And in other municipalities, I've seen kind of lawsuits happen between a pedestrian that gets hurt and that adjacent uh, property owner. However, I've never seen that in Seattle. So, code enforcement, only the vegetation is what we're concerned with. So that's all I really know about that here. All right. Well, thank you. We have a couple people in here. Does anybody have any questions? If you're new, we could give a little explanation of who we are, what we do. But feel free to put that in the chat if you'd like.
Evelyn, did you have a question? So yeah, we've got a couple of new people joining our Q&A here for code enforcement or code compliance. My name's Elizabeth Krasminski. I'm a senior housing and zoning inspector for the city of Seattle, but I'm also the auditor for the rental registration inspection ordinance. And I've got Edwin Duran, my colleague here, and I'll let him introduce himself.
Yep. Good morning. Still Edwin Duran, senior housing zoning inspector. And just a reminder, this meeting is being recorded. I have a chat question here from Life Tech. If we are going to do a construction project in a single family neighborhood for an ADU, do we need to post a sign for notification of nearby homeowners? You know, yeah, I don't know. So that's going to be through the permitting process. You need a permit, and then they will let you know if you need a post or not. So you definitely need a permit. I can tell you that. And then throughout that process, they'll let you know if you need a post. The land use action, which I don't think you will. It's kind of a smaller project.
Typically, you are required to display your permit. That's something you might want to put like in your front window so that people do know that you're complying, and it saves your neighbors time. They can look it up.
Yeah, I'm gonna assume the land use actions are for bigger projects like master use permits, things like that. But again, don't take my word for it. You'll definitely be notified throughout the permitting process.
That's awful
Okay,
quiet out there.
I have another question. No one
Okay,
else.
go ahead, Sharon.
I'm just looking out my window and seeing all these wires from poles, like old telephone poles and whatever. Who would you call to find out if any of those are no longer being used and some of those wires can come down now that we're on cable and all that sort of thing?
Yeah, Seattle City Light.
And typically, Sharon, just so you know, Seattle City Light will take down decommissioned wires. They don't want them up there because they just confuse things when things go haywire, shall we say, like in a windstorm. So if they've been decommissioned, they're taking them down. Cable is typically underground, but that's not your utility. That's your cable. That's your video. That's your audio. That's not going to be above ground usually anyhow. So
There are so many wires. I'm just wondering how many of them are live and how many aren't. And so it's only City Light you call first for
yeah.
that.
My best guess is that they're all live because, as I said, Seattle City Light will take out the lines that have been decommissioned. They'll take them out. They don't want them up there.
In the chat, I went ahead and put the Seattle City Light street light problem and issue line, the phone number for that. So that's on there.
Thank you.
You can also go online and make reports. You just need to copy down, I think there's an identification number on the pole, and you can send it to them via, email.
There are just all these wires coming to my building, and I'm wondering if they're all live. I don't know and all across the street, and there's so many of them.
I just put the link to their service request website as well for Seattle City Light.
Thank you.
No problem.
Yeah.
This is Chris. I have another question if there isn't anybody else that has one.
Please, yeah.
Well, this is more about you guys. What is it like to do this job in Seattle? How have you seen things change? What is it like from your perspective?
Liz, you want to go first or me?
You can go first because you've been here longer.
Yeah, it's great. It's kind of amazing. We have many, many cases every single year, and we clean up many properties. We fix a lot of issues, but we're never looking for issues. There's so many problems happening in Seattle that we always have work. So thankfully, that's a good thing. We have kind of two lines of the business. We have the zoning side, which is working with property owners or working with neighboring property owners to make sure that their neighborhood stays, the way it should stay, kind of maintained in that, in what people are typically accustomed to. There's like these newer low-rise things that are coming up. They're being way higher. So sometimes we're put in the middle of, trying to maintain the neighborhood, the way the neighborhood looks, and then trying to also look at these new constructions and the new regulations. When we're in the middle of that, somebody usually ends up kind of being upset with the outcome. Sometimes we could help somebody, but we cannot help someone else. And all we can do is enforce the code. So that's always a little tricky situation. However, what kind of helps is the housing side. So we receive complaints from people living in substandard conditions, people that are paying rent, that sometimes have cockroach infestations in their home or bed bug infestations. Sometimes they're left without heat in the middle of winter and they have a family. And so that really helps out. We're able to help those people either make sure that they're living in the minimum standards set forth by the code, or just this Christmas, we were able to relocate an entire family with the help of some organizations to an to a hotel for the weekend, and then got them into permanent housing when they got scammed into renting out a vacant building that really shouldn't have any people living in there. So there's definitely hard aspects of the job, but there's days where we could really make an impact in the community and the neighborhood and really help people, and that really keeps me going. Um, Sorry, that was kind of long-winded, Liz.
I'd have to agree with Edwin. You know, my position is different than Edwin's. I'm almost 100% housing enforcement and not even the housing code. I'm the rental registration auditor. So I deal exclusively with that code. And, you know, what keeps me going is like Edwin said, you know, keeping people in safe, habitable housing. I mean, you know, it's one thing to have a roof over your head, but it's another thing to have a roof over your head when the walls are falling in around you. And one of the things that, you know, made me leave a very comfortable position in another jurisdiction and come to Seattle is because Seattle does have a very strong housing code and they take it very seriously. They really look at the conditions people live in and they want it to be safe. You know, when my daughter was in college, she lived in a place where I couldn't go to that house. She was living in a closet. There wasn't a window. Her dad had to go and tell her, "Hey, this isn't safe." And, you know, now those situations are addressed. Kids aren't living in closets. Kids aren't living on college students who are paying tens of thousands of dollars in tuition aren't living on dirt floors because Seattle takes housing seriously. You know, the homeless crisis is a whole nother story. I wish I had time in my career to solve that problem too, or be part of that solution. But just the fact that Seattle takes housing so seriously, like I said, that's what I have come to admire about Seattle. And as I said, I left a very comfortable position elsewhere to do this work, and it's very gratifying. You know, I'm looking at my career in the rearview mirror, and I don't want to retire because there's still so much to do. But you know what? That's for the next generation of code enforcement. That's for the next group who have the unbounding energy to take it on, because Seattle has really made inroads into housing enforcement and they're making a difference. People are living safer now. That's my opinion. And so that's what I see. You know, if that sounds like I'm Pollyanna, well, I guess I dated myself, right?
Well, thank you. Thank you for, I do get that feeling when I interact with code compliance, that they do care, that they are on top of it. They're trying to do everything they can. And that's, you know, how I got into this is I could sense that there was the unsafety next door to me was starting to build. When that propane tank went in, that's when all my light bulbs went off. And, you know, I've been here since 1997 and I loved the city when I moved here. And I don't think, I feel that a lot of us are going through a lot of grief. I'm going through a lot of grief about watching the changes in the city, and a lot of them not for the good, even though they have good intentions. So I have had a lot of frustration dealing with a lot of the city, but when I deal with code compliance, I don't have those frustrations. I feel like I'm being heard. I feel like I'm being taken seriously, and I feel like common sense and safety is coming first. So at least I know the old Seattle still feels alive to me when I deal with SDCI. Yeah. So thank you. I appreciate your work very much.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, you know, we're the messengers, right? So city council tells us what our jobs are, and we're there to really help the citizens kind of live the life that they want while abiding with the code and making sure the neighborhood are all happy and okay. So we're not going to go out there and make people do something that they shouldn't do. We're there enforcing the code. And sometimes people are happy, sometimes they're not, but we always try helping people. We try working with them as much as we can. And, you know, even listening to Liz, sometimes it sounds crazy to hear that there's people sleeping on dirt floors or in closets, you know, but it's crazy until you open the door and hit somebody's foot that's on the floor inside of a closet. So yeah, we actually see it, and we're helping avoid that and hopefully saving somebody's life if there is kind of a fire or something that occurs on that property, they're able to safely get out. And that's what these minimum standards are for.
Yeah, and they are just minimum standards, but let me tell you, there's a lot of people in the world that are and in very comfortable communities around us living in less than the minimum standards. And I can attest to that. I've seen it, I've lived it. And it's good work. None of us are in it for the money. None of us in government are in it for the money. We're doing it because we want to make a difference. And there are some things that, have deteriorated in Seattle. There are some things that aren't the same. When I moved here in 1982, it's not the same, but there are some things that are definitely better. So, but you just keep plugging away. You just keep pounding on it and trying to fix what's broken. Rose, did you have a question for us?
Yeah, actually I do. We have a house where there are trees along the street that were planted, I believe, by the city. And these trees have been there for such a long time that now the roots are now, how do I say it? They're lifting up the sidewalk to the point where the sidewalk has cracks in it. And we're scared that somebody's going to get hurt. I know it's not our property, but it's a sidewalk and it's right in front of our house. And how do we get the city to do something about these sidewalks that are cracked because of their trees? They planted these trees decades ago now. What do we do about that? And I also have another question that's my main question. That's what I'm most worried about.
Yeah, let's answer that one first, and then you could ask us the second one. So, there's usually regulations that make the adjacent sidewalk and right of way, that property's responsibility.
I know the city planted these trees. We did not plant these trees, and they're all along the street.
Right. So that's the other thing. So you could always submit a complaint with SDOT, and we have mapping that tells us who the tree belongs to, who planted it. And it's quite possible that if they do belong to SDOT, they planted them, then they would make those repairs. But there's probably a lot of people waiting for that. That would all be through SDOT, Seattle Department of Transportation.
Okay. I don't see why a property owner would be responsible for something along the street that we didn't plant. But okay, so I'll contact SDOT.
Yeah, it's just the way the way the regulations are written. Typically you're responsible for that planting strip, etc.
Wow. You're responsible for the maintenance of that planting strip.
Mm-hmm.
But okay, that's a longer conversation.
Yes.
I'll talk to SDOT people.
Okay.
So how about for trees that are on our property, within our property, and then there are wires that go through the branches of the trees? Who do we contact? I mean, is that our responsibility to trim those trees, or do we call Seattle City Light, or what do we do?
Yes. So if the tree is past your property and it's covering a whole bunch of wires, then sometimes Seattle City Light will go out and cut them and kind of maintain that's past your property. However, if the tree is totally on private property, then we kind of had a similar question. It would be almost the same. You would most likely want to get an arborist, unfortunately, to look at the tree and make sure that it's trimmed correctly. The reason I say that is just trees are heavily protected in Seattle. And so, there's regulations and you're allowed to cut down 3 non-exceptional trees a year. So if this is a non-exceptional tree and you kind of mess with it, it could be okay. And if it dies, you're allowed to remove 3 non-exceptional trees per year. However, if it is an exceptional tree or a protected tree in the city of Seattle and you start doing trimming excessively, there could be kind of a violation found from that. If you cause significant damage to where the tree dies, and that would be considered removal. And if it's an exceptional tree, we would definitely look into that. So it's always a good idea to get, it is on your property. You would have to maintain it, but you should get a professional to look at that and make sure it's done correctly.
What is the definition of an exceptional tree?
Great question. It all depends. So it depends on the species and the size. So we measure diameter at breast height, which is 4.5 feet from the ground. And again, it would just depend on the species. Some of them could be exceptional at 12 inches diameter at breast height. And typically we would consider any tree larger than 30 inches exceptional. But we have a list of, maybe 50 or more trees that are exceptional at less than 30 degrees. It just depends on the species.
Oh,
The other thing you would want to consider is you would want to make sure you're not in an environmentally critical area, like landslide prone, a habitat area, something like that for herrings. You would not be allowed to remove or cut anything in an environmentally critical area without a permit.
okay. Okay, that's fair.
Mhm.
Is there a recording of this
Yes.
session that'll be posted online? And did you have one last week that's also posted online?
I believe so, yes.
Do you know what the website is for that? Could you share that, please?
I actually don't know what the website is, but do you
Let
know?
me see if I can find it. I just put in the chat the tip sheet numbers for information regarding trees and regarding ECAs, environmentally critical areas. But yeah, I believe there was a recording done of last week's, and last week was on tree regulations. So give me a minute. Let me see if I can find it. I think.
And so I should say tree trimming is allowed without a permit. You just want to be kind of considerate that something could happen, and it's better to protect yourself as the homeowner than not. And sometimes getting that arborist is a little bit of an extra step that's good for yourself.
Okay, arborist. Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, it's Sharon. I wanted to thank both of you. Really, this was really informative and a great session. I'm going to take the one at 1 o'clock also, so I need to go have lunch. But thank you both for taking the time to give me all this information.
No problem. Thank you very much, and I hope we get that structure down soon.
I do too. Sounds like it's going to be a long process. Thank you.
And
Thank you.
Just remember, I put my email address in the chat. If you want to send me an email, I promise I will respond and I will try and steer you in the right information. And I'm still trying to find out what the website is for last week's presentation.
Yeah, I'll put
Thank you, Elizabeth. I will contact you in the next couple of days.
Okay,
Thanks.
take care.
Thanks.
And
Bye.
remind me where I met you, so to speak.
I will.
Okay?
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you so much.
my email is there as well, and so like if you're looking for the posting, if we can't find that, shoot us an email and we'll definitely get a link out to you of where that's being kept.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I know that I saw it, and for the love of money, I can't find it now.
Yeah, I can look. Sorry, another person kind of organized all of this, so I just don't know where they're putting it, but we can definitely find out. We'll definitely find out for sure.
That's why I looked. I looked in hers, so.
Yeah, I tried to look earlier and I couldn't find any of the recordings from last week, at least.
And I'm not sure if they need to vet them before they post them. Yeah, that's just a different team, but we'll definitely get an answer for you, especially if you send us an email.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Let me see. Yeah, I don't see anything about that here.
Yeah, I thought it was in Nathan's, Monday morning, and it wasn't there. I just looked, and then I looked for Moon's too.
Okay, well, it is noon, but I'm happy to answer any remaining questions for the people that are still here.
I can stick around for a little bit longer too.
Okay, we'll wait a couple of seconds, but if not, I want to thank everybody for joining us. Hopefully we answered some of the questions you have or had. If we didn't or something else comes up, then both Elizabeth's email as well as mine are in the chat box. Feel free to send us an email, and we'll definitely get an answer to you, regardless of if it's related to code compliance or not. We'll steer you in the right direction.
So actually, I have a question. Thank you for staying on a little bit longer. This is Rose. We most likely will be remodeling a house, and we're going to have a lot of junk, and so that we're going to need to take to the dump. Is there a better way to like take or dispose of like bathtubs and, I mean, big things, kitchen cabinets, and I mean, what would you guys recommend?
So can I chime in here? Habitat for Humanity will take disposed of building materials, provided it's still usable, and they have their own standards. You might want to take a look at maybe their website. Habitat for Humanity has a couple of different stores. There used to be one in Ballard called the Reuse store, and then there's Second Use. There's one down on First Avenue that I love to go into these places because they do have all this old charming stuff, and they'll take your donation. King County Solid Waste does take your waste, and they have specific regulations on what they'll take. Like, they won't take anything that might be asbestos or anything that might be hazardous. So that's another website that I would look at. There's questions about the environment and what goes into the dump, so to speak. But those would be the two places that I would look. But the first place I would look at is like Habitat for Humanity or a Second Use type of donation center. Edwin, did you have anything?
No, I would say that's probably the best. Yeah, unfortunately, there isn't a lot of options.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Good luck.
Yeah.
Thanks, I'm gonna need it. It's gonna be big.
Yeah, just try to make sure you pick up all the nails. Neighbors really hate to go over your nails on a bicycle.
Oh yeah,
They
no.
really hate that.
So would my kids. So totally agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've donated a lot to Habitat for Humanity. I didn't realize that they took building materials as well. So I'll contact them.
Yeah, like bathtubs and old sinks and stuff like that. And there's another. Trying to think, it's down on First Avenue, and I don't know if it's related to Habitat for Humanity or not, but it's like Seattle Second Use or something like that. I know my husband and I went in there looking for windows for an old house once, so it's great.
Oh, that's great.
They're great resource, and sometimes you find what you're looking for.
Yeah.
Depending on, what kind of a remodel you're doing. I mean, if you're going all high tech, you might not find it there, but sometimes you find what you're looking for in some of these older places.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So could you elaborate? Thank you for that. Could you elaborate a little bit more on asbestos? How do we know how to spot asbestos?
Edwin, do you want to take a stab at this, or should I take a stab first?
Go ahead. You got it.
Okay. So asbestos, what you want to look at is when your house was originally built, and then find out what the standards were at that time. Asbestos was in all kinds of things. They used to wrap pipes in it. And I remember as a kid in my house in Chicago, our furnace was wrapped in asbestos. And I used to think it was the coolest thing in the world to just sit there and dig in the asbestos. It's amazing I'm still alive. Okay. So, all kinds of things were wrapped in asbestos, and it's really based on when the house was built. So there are agencies, you can look them up online, who will do asbestos testing, because there's lead and asbestos regulations in the state of Washington, and for removal of those items, there are regulations for that removal, because you have to encapsulate it before you dispose of it, and then it has to be disposed of properly. So, while we don't regulate that, the state does under Department of Labor and Industries.
Okay.
Yeah. So my recommendation would be if your house was built before 1978, which is I think 1977 is when they made asbestos use illegal in most instances, and you're removing things like the ceiling, maybe in a basement, or maybe old tile, duct work, stuff like that. It's probably just a good idea to get a specialist in there to test and make sure that something doesn't have asbestos before you remove it. If it does, you would probably want a professional to go in there and remove all of that. Especially if there's children or something around, you don't want that getting everywhere.
And when it comes to tile, I know that, again, Department of Labor and Industries has a lot of information on their website. With tile, sometimes it's more dangerous to try tile, say from a concrete surface in your basement. They have recommendations for how to encapsulate it instead of removing it, so that the hazard is tapped down or encapsulated.
Oh, so it's kind of buried.
Yeah, you're kind of burying the problem, but it's an option. They got to give you options.
Yeah, and remember, asbestos is most dangerous when it's disturbed. So sometimes, like, just because it's in the tile, if you put something over it, doesn't necessarily mean the hazard is there. The hazard would happen when you try removing those tiles, or when you try removing that popcorn ceiling. That's when you start exposing yourself to the asbestos in a hazardous way.
Okay. Okay, that's good to know. Thank you.
Great question. Yeah, thank you.
I still can't find that recording.
Yeah, I'm gonna assume they probably don't have it up yet.
So do we just email you or
I would say, yeah, please do that, and we'll definitely get you the link to wherever they put it.
Here, I just found it.
Oh, you found it. Okay.
You can tell your attendees that we will be posting recordings and presentations on this webpage. So I'm going to put the webpage in the chat.
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
Awesome. Thank you, Liz.
Yeah, I really had to dig for that one. Oh, come on. Let's paste it.
Yeah, and they had a great presentation on trees last week. Is that what you were referring to?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because I'm worried about these trees that the city put in there, and it's disturbing the sidewalk. And it's to the point where my husband painted the cracks in red. He put red spray paint to just alert whoever's jogging up or walking up the hill that that there's a hazard. But if the hazard was not caused by us, I don't understand. I don't know. That to me seems so unfair.
Well, so something that you have to think about, and this is coming from the insurance adjuster that came out when the tree fell on my mother's house. It was an act of God. And I'm thinking to myself, yeah, no, that might have been an act of God that the tree fell, but it was an act of the neighbor who didn't maintain the tree. So, I hear what you're saying, but that's the kind of the mentality here. The maintenance, it's the maintenance. And, the right of way is the street, that's the travel portion, and the sidewalk, but the city takes care of the street, and they kind of expect you to take care of the sidewalk. It might seem counterintuitive, but the real authority to ask would be, like Edwin said, talk to SDOT. They've got an answer for you, I'm sure. And you might not like it. I'm not saying we're right and you're wrong, or you're right and we're wrong, but that would be the entity that would have the authority to tell you what's for fact. So
okay.
Yeah, hopefully the video will give some explanation, but I believe that presentation it's definitely from SDCI, so I believe it had most likely another senior inspector in there with code compliance. And then our arborists. And so most of the regulations we enforce are on the private property.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So definitely ask SDOT, but watch the video. They may have talked about it. I'm not sure.
And I'm not sure if the recordings are up yet, but that's the recordings will be posted.
Okay.
Some later date. Yeah.
Okay. So just check. That would be for all of this. all of the, I don't know, the sessions that you guys had, right?
There was quite a
Yes.
few, yes.
Yeah, the whole entire, it's Stay Connected Seattle Home Fairs.
Oh.
So yeah, it would be all the sessions. You just have to go through the index, I guess.
Okay, okay, perfect. Thank you.
Evelyn, did you have any questions for us?
Okay.
Well, then I guess we're gonna end this session. Again, my name's Elizabeth Krasminski, and I'm a senior inspector for the city of Seattle. This was recorded. Edwin Duran's email address is in the chat, and I'll put mine once again. If anyone has questions, please go ahead and send us an email, and we promise to get back to you.
Okay, so we could send the email directly to you guys instead of using the Q&A, because I've used the Q&A and I haven't received answers. Well, I have in a couple times, but not others. So I just want to make sure I get a reply.
You know what? I try really, really hard to answer all my emails, and sometimes the answer is going to be I don't know, but I'm going to have to steer you to somebody else. And I can speak for myself. I will answer the email. I know Edwin's really reliable as well. Q&A, it's technology. Who knows? Maybe it didn't go through. It's technology. It doesn't always work. So.
Yeah, I'll definitely answer any questions if I can. If they're permit specific, kind of like, sometimes you go to Q&A for permitting specific questions. Then unfortunately, that would be the answer is I don't know. You'd have to go through permitting, but you'll definitely get a reply if you email either Liz or myself.
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
That's my promise to you.
Yes.
Thank you. This is recorded, right?
That's right.
I'll do it. That's okay.
But it might be, like I said, it might be that response. I don't know. I'm going to have to refer you to somebody else.
Oh, that's fine. That's fine.
Okay.
As long as I get a reply, some kind of reply. Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate
You're very welcome.
it.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Okay,
Good
thank you
night.
very much.
Have a good afternoon. Enjoy. Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye. Okay, do we want to?
I'm going to go ahead and end the meeting and
Oh, I was
for
going to
everybody.
ask. Okay, we're going to end it for everybody. Okay.
Yes, I'll give you a call. Thank you.
Okay. All right, bye.
Bye-bye.
Leave meeting. I'm leaving the meeting. Leave meeting.